Hi, my name is Glenn Lucas and I live here in southeast Ireland in County Carlow, which is at the foothills of Mount Leinster. I grew up about 2 miles away from where we live now on a family farm, and I always thought I was going to be a farmer until at the age of 16 I came across a wood-turning lathe at a friend's house, and very quickly I knew that was what I wanted to do with my life. When I left school I decided to become a cabinet maker, so I trained for 4 years. And once I had my time served, I actually thought it would be really nice to work for myself. So I undertook a craft and design business course with the Crafts Council of Ireland in Kilkenny, and that's where I picked up the skills of running a business and was allowed to work on my own designs. When the course was over, I attended shows around the world, trade fairs, and had a chance to show the wares that I was making. And I was lucky enough to be picked up by many of the large retail outlets in places like New York and London and Dublin. So for many years I spent all my time supplying shops with salad bowls, and about 10-12 years ago I decided to start teaching, and we discovered that there was many people were really interested in learning about the skills that I had and I was willing to share. So 2 years ago we decided to build this new building, which is one of the finest wood turning schools in the world. We've had people coming here from over 30 countries to take a class with me. Today I'd like to show you how to make this dinner plate, and it's made from native Irish sycamore. Now, one of the nice things about sycamore is it's very easy to work with. It dries very quickly and it stands up to lots of use over time. I have a piece down here that proves that point. This piece was given to me by a good friend called Kieran Forbes, who was a monk in Glenstall Abbey, County Limerick. And it's several hundred years of age. And when I look closely, I can see some knife marks on the surface. So I can see that it was used many times over the years. And it always makes me think about doing the best I can with each piece that I make, because many people will be around for years to come seeing that work. So join me in the workshop as I take you through the making of this piece. I have a piece of Irish sycamore here that's been drying for several years. And the first thing I need to do before marking it out is just checking to see if there's any defects. So looking here on the surface, I can see that there's an old dead knot, and that's going to fall out quite soon. So I need to make sure that I mark my circle for a platter outside that area. So I like the grain pattern over here. It's got some really nice ripple here in the corner that will come through on the finished piece. And I'm going to mark my circle, keep it close to that knot without including it. Bring it a little bit closer. The first step here is to attach the piece of wood to the faceplate so I can mount it on the lathe. So I'm going to just center that using the original center mark from the compass. And I need to be careful to use short screws so I'm not left with screw holes in the final piece. This surface here on top is going to be the upper side of the plate when it's finished. So I'll put the first screw in just a little bit of the way, just to secure it. If I go the whole way, it tends to spin the plate around and I lose the center point. So now I'll go opposite, then back to the original screw there. So when I'm putting a piece on the lathe, I need to make sure it's screwed on tight, so when I push the stop button, it doesn't unscrew. So just at the end of the thread, I give it that little flick. So I'll bring in the tool rest, and the first part of the platter that I'm going to work on is this outer edge. So I need to sharpen the tools before I start work, and then I'll shape it up. I have the tool really sharp, and that's important because this piece is spinning so fast on the lathe that the tool becomes dull very quickly. So I normally sharpen the tools before I start the turning process, and then I sharpen the tools one more time before making the finishing cuts so I don't have to sand for very long. When I look at this piece turning, I can see that it's moving in and out a little bit because it warped quite a bit when it was drying. And so I'm going to true up the bottom surface and the edge first of all, and then mark out the dimensions. Normally when I make these, I make them in large numbers, so I try to keep them all exactly the same diameter and looking quite similar in shape, so that if a shop wants to buy them in large numbers, they have an order code for ordering the piece, and then I can make them all identical for them. Let's just have a quick look here. So I've got the surface nice and flat. There's a little bit of torn out wood here because that was an aggressive cut that I made, but using a sharper tool and moving the tool a little slower, I'll get really good results there. One of the things I need to think about all the time is how I stand at the lathe. People talk often about being good with your hands, but actually it's using your feet and your whole body is really important to making smooth flowing cuts and curves with the bowl gouge. For example, when I'm working on the bottom of the platter here, I stand with my right foot forward, I lean in with the handle by my side, and then I just lean backwards. So the handle just stays close to my body all the time. When I'm working on the edge here, I'll bring the rest around, and then I'll stand with my legs parallel to the rest. So to move the tool from the right hand side to the left, all I need to do is just bend my left knee so the tool moves slowly across the rest. So the next step here is to just mark out the base and mark out where the rim is going to be with the pencil. So I'm measuring down 8 millimeters, and I'll just bring the pencil up to that mark. Okay. We'll bring the tool rest around to the base. And on a platter, it's really important that it has a large base So for example, on a salad bowl, I make the base normally about 1/3 of the overall width. On a platter, the base needs to be much wider, so at least half of the overall width. So when you're using a knife or a fork to push down, it's not going to topple the platter over. So here I'm going to measure in 6 centimeters, and then I'll continue that line all the way around as well. Get my respirator back on. I'm going to stop there for 1 second and just take a look. So far I've been going in straight lines here, but now I'm going to start refining the shape a little bit. So for that to happen, I'm going to bring the tool rest in a little bit closer. And one thing you may have noticed, I've been working from the base towards the rim, cutting in one direction all the time. The reason for that is that it's really important that I cut with the grain. So take for example with my pencil, if I was sharpening this pencil, I'd always sharpen with a knife in that direction. If I sharpen in this direction, it splinters the wood out. So the grain in this piece of wood on the lathe right now runs in the same direction as it does in the pencil. So therefore I continue to cut all the time from the base towards the rim. So let's put a really nice shape on this piece now. So the shape that I put on this is called a Roman ogee. At the bottom here we have a concave, and then a convex in the center, and then concave towards the top. That's all going to sit very nicely into my hands when I'm holding the piece when it's finished. The next step here is to work on the base. I'm going to check and see if the base is flat, and it's not. I can see the way the ruler is rocking on the surface, and that tells me I have to take away some wood here from the center. When I'm using this at the very end, it's going to sit here obviously on the outer edge, so there should be no contact in there. So I'm going to start by removing some wood from the center, and then I'll make a slow cut all the way across, getting rid of some of this torn area here with the rough surface. We'll check that one more time with the ruler, and I can see there's a slight gap in the center, so this piece is perfect. The next step is to think about how I'm going to hold this piece when I turn it around and I need to remove the material from the inside. So the best option in this case is to put a recess in there. So I need to mark it now next for the size of the chuck that I'm going to use. So here I'm just going to first of all put a random mark on the bottom of the bowl, which will be a little bit too small for the chuck that I'm going to use. And then I'm going to reposition the dividers so that it's got an equal space both sides, and this will be the correct size. I now have to remove some wood at the bottom to make a recess, and for that I'm going to use this flat tool that's called a scraper, which will do it quite effectively. So just get my face shield on again. So that looks pretty good, and I'm just going to check it for size in the chuck that I'm going to use. And that's perfect. So I just remove the chuck, and now it's ready for sanding. I'm ready now to start sanding this piece, but before I select the sandpaper, I'm going to have a look at the finish from the tools. So right now it feels really smooth, and there's no torn surface there, which means I can start to sand with some of the finer sandpaper. If I was forced to use some of the coarser sandpaper here, whether it's from lack of experience with tools, or in the case of the wood having minerals in it that takes the sharp edge off the tools, the coarse sandpaper would lose some of these really nice details. So it's in my interest to keep the tools as sharp as possible and then move the tools slowly so it cuts really cleanly, like what I've achieved there. So I'm going to select the sandpaper, starting at 120 grit, 180, 240, and then 320. Take that out of the way. I'm going to use an electric drill. This is a variable speed drill. It's called a right angle drill, so the head is at 90 degrees. But in it, I put a little 2-inch or 50mm sanding pad so I can attach the sanding discs to that. So I'm going to switch on my dust extractor, get my helmet down, and sand this carefully. So this piece now is really smooth, and now I'm going to just put some oil on the back, and then it'll be ready to turn around and work on the inside. I'm now going to put on the finish, which is a food safe oil. So this can be used over and over again for serving whatever your meal is of that day. So I'll just dip the cloth in, and it's always best not to put on the finish when the lathe is turning, because it tends to spray the oil everywhere. But you can see the way the grain really starts to pop when the oil goes on the surface. And the oil will soak in over the next couple of days, so it may need another coat before being used. And at this point, I'm going to turn on the lathe slowly and just push the cloth in it to generate some heat, and that will drive the oil deeper into the wood grain. A little bit more speed. And then I'll take a dry part of the cloth to mop up some of the excess. And that's it. It looks really, really good. If you look here carefully, you can see some of these beautiful ripple lines. So this is called fiddleback sycamore, and quite often this type of wood is used for making musical instruments. But when you're holding that piece and you tilt it a little bit, you can see the light changes that grain texture on the surface. So we'll remove it from the lathe. I'll put on the chuck. And I'll give it a little flick so that it doesn't unscrew. So the next step is to just remove the faceplate, and then we'll mount the platter into the chuck. So I need to be careful here just to make sure there's no dust on the jaws, so that the piece runs perfectly through. You open up the jaws and then apply just the right amount of pressure. Too much pressure at this stage could actually split the piece if I wasn't careful. We'll bring in the tool rest and just check that everything is running through. That looks perfect, and now we're ready to start turning again. I've just sharpened the tools because they do lose the edge quite quickly, especially after making heavy roughing cuts. So it's really important, just before I make my final cuts, the tools are razor sharp. It's important that I don't take too much away from the center until the rim is finished, or it can move slightly, which would make it impossible to go over the rim again later on. So I'm going to just put on my shield one more time and get working on the inside. At the moment, the surface is quite rough here with all the ridges, but the ridges will help guide the tool when it comes to taking some of the wood away from the inside a little later on. But I'm going to just transfer my attention now over to the rim here so that I get that finely shaped. I'm going to switch to another tool which is a little bit smaller, and this will help me work on some of the fine details that I'm going to put there on the rim. I'll just check that that's nice and smooth, and it is. It feels really good. The rim is a little bit too wide at the moment, but I can always pare off some of the width when I'm taking the inside out. But I'm going to soften these edges here just first before doing any more. We'll just see how that feels before moving on. And that's really good. Nice soft edges, so when I'm holding it in my hands, there's no sharp edges cutting into this area. I'm just going to put another little feature in here called a half bead, and that will define where the rim ends and the interior of the platter starts. So the details here are nice and crisp. I now have to remove some of the wood here in the center, but I have to take some things into consideration. So the first thing that I notice here are the 4 screw holes, and I can't have any evidence of those at the very, very end. So once I take enough of wood away, those will disappear. The other thing that's really important is that I don't go through the bottom of the piece. So I have to pay careful attention to the wall thickness all the time. And here I have a calipers in the shape of a number 8, and this straight side here will fit between the chuck jaws all the way into the center so that I can see how much wood I'm left with. So right now I have roughly about 3 centimeters, and if I'm left at the end with about 6-7 millimeters, I'll be happy. So we'll take those away, pick up the bowl gouge and get rid of some of this wood. I'm going to check and see if the screw holes are gone, and they are. So that's sorted. I'm going to check the wall thickness again. So now I have about 16 millimeters left, and I want to get it down to about 6. So I'll take 10 more off. But at this point, I'm going to start removing some of these ridges in here, and I'm going to start practicing for a really smooth surface by pushing the tool from the outside all the way into the center. I'm going to leave this little piece here in the center so that it helps me remember exactly how much wood I'm taking off, so I don't have to measure it too often. And at the end, I'll get rid of that little stub. I'll stop and have a look and just have a listen as well. So you can hear the sound starting to change down there. There's a high-pitched sound which tells me I'm starting to get thinner. So at this point, I'll get rid of the nub in the middle. I'm going to switch over to another tool that's been sharpened previously, and it's razor sharp just for my final cuts. This piece feels really very good all the way across the bottom, but I do feel a tiny little ridge, which I'm going to get rid of just before I sand it. So I'm going to take this scraper to the grinder and sharpen it first. You always know that the tool is really sharp when you get this angel's hair coming straight from that edge. So that feels really good. One thing you might have noticed me doing is putting my hand at the back of the platter as I'm using the tool. And the reason for that is that it's very easy to apply pressure onto the face of the platter, which will make it start to vibrate. And that will start to pull fibers out of the wood if that starts to vibrate. So keeping my hand behind it as I push the tool down on the rest rather than against the wood will give me the best cut. So at this point, I'm ready now for sanding. I'm ready for sanding now, but before I do that, I want to explain one or two things. It's really important for me to keep all this nice, crisp detail that I got from the turning tools. So I have to pay careful attention when I'm sanding. And one of the things that I'll always do when I'm attaching the little sandpaper discs, just make sure it's in the center, because if it's a little bit off at all, it'll round over some of these nice crisp corners. So I bring the speed of the lathe down a little bit when I'm sanding. It's normally running about 500 or 600 RPM. I'll turn on the dust extractor and I'm ready to go. I'm now ready to put the finish on the inside. So I'll just rub it in, exactly like doing the exterior. And it's okay if I get a little bit on the back again. A little bit of extra oil won't hurt it. And now I'll just spin the lathe. A little bit faster. That looks really, really good. Really has brought the grain out. There's one more thing that'll really help it, and that is beeswax. So this is some of our own homemade beeswax. So we use a mixture of carnauba wax, beeswax, and some liquid paraffin, or often known as mineral oil, to just give that an extra polish. And it smells really good as well. Switch on the lathe again. Okay, so all we have to do now is sign it. I'm really pleased at how this piece turned out. The grain is really stunning, and I hope that it's used for many, many years wherever this piece ends up. I get asked all the time about how to look after the pieces so they'll always look great. And I suppose the one piece of advice that I would give people, first of all, don't put it in the dishwasher. When you've used it for serving food, just wipe it with a damp cloth using soapy water and dry it off immediately. And just leave it to one side so it air dries before storing it. If you treat it that way, it'll last for a long, long time. If you want to keep it with a really nice luster and shine, at any time you can use beeswax on the surface, and that will keep it looking great. So thank you for watching today, and hopefully someday you will end up with one of these heirloom pieces.